What happened inside Harry and Meghan's home that night was not an argument. It was a decision that would change everything. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're breaking down the full story, every detail, every turning point, and everything that followed. So stay with us till the end, because what happens next changes everything. According to sources familiar with the private hours that followed days of mounting silence, the moment Meghan Markle finally reached her breaking point did not come during an argument, nor during a public disagreement, nor even in a raised voice, but in a quiet, almost unbearable stillness that filled their home late at night, when Prince Harry sat alone at the edge of the room, staring at nothing, his phone untouched beside him, carrying the weight of a decision he had not yet spoken aloud, but had already begun to live inside. And it was in that silence, insiders say, that Meghan realized something had changed in him permanently, not suddenly, but steadily, like a tide that had been rising for weeks, pulling him back toward a life they had once chosen to leave behind together. And as she watched him from across the room, she understood that this was no longer about the palace, or titles, or the past, but about identity, and identity, once shaken, does not return quietly. Those close to the couple say Meghan had been holding herself together for days, perhaps longer, sensing the shift in Harry's mood long before he acknowledged it himself, noticing the way he paused before answering simple questions, the way his gaze drifted when their children spoke, the way the future they had planned together now felt blurred at the edges, as if rewritten in invisible ink. And while she had tried to be patient, to give him space, to let him process whatever had been awakened by his secret meeting and the conversations that followed, the cost of waiting had grown heavier each night. Because waiting, when the stakes are your family, is not neutral, it is exhausting, and exhaustion eventually becomes clarity. According to insiders, the breaking point arrived when Meghan finally asked a question Harry could not answer, not about the palace, not about William, not about King Charles, but about them, about where he was going emotionally, about whether the life they had built was still enough. And when Harry hesitated, not in refusal but in uncertainty, the silence that followed became louder than any argument, because uncertainty, more than disagreement, is what breaks trust, and it was in that moment. Sources say that Meghan stood up, not in anger, but in resolve, and told him she could no longer live inside a question mark. What followed was not shouting, not drama, not the kind of confrontation tabloids imagine, but something far more final, because according to those familiar with the exchange, Meghan told Harry that he had to choose, not between her and the monarchy, but between clarity and confusion, between moving forward and drifting backward, between building a future or endlessly reopening the past. And she told him, with a calm that frightened him more than anger ever could, that she would stand beside him only if he stood firmly somewhere, because she could not raise their children inside uncertainty, could not wake every morning wondering which life he belonged to, could not protect their family while he remained emotionally divided. And that was the night, insiders say, she gave him an ultimatum, not spoken as a threat, but as a boundary, a line drawn not in fury, but in survival. Harry, according to those close to him, did not respond immediately, because the words had struck something raw, forcing him to confront what he had avoided admitting even to himself, that his heart was split between two truths, one built on love and freedom, the other on duty and legacy. And for the first time since leaving royal life, he realized that the choice he thought he had already made years ago was no longer holding. That distance had given him perspective but not peace, and that peace, once lost, does not return until a decision is made. And as the night stretched on, the house remained quiet, the children asleep, the world unaware, while inside, a marriage stood at a crossroads that would redefine not only their future, but the story the world would eventually hear. And as dawn approached, sources say, Harry still had not answered her, because some choices are too heavy to make in a single night, even when time has run out. And that silence stretched longer than Harry expected, settling into the room like a presence either of them could ignore. Because the ultimatum Meghan had given him was not loud, not dramatic, not even spoken with anger, but it carried the weight of finality. And as he sat there, unable to respond, he realized that for the first time since leaving the United Kingdom, There was no neutral ground left to stand on. No space where he could hold two identities at once, because Meghan's words had quietly stripped away the illusion that time alone would solve what he had avoided deciding, and according to those familiar with the night, Harry remained awake long after Meghan had turned away, staring at the darkened room as memories rose uninvited, not of conflict, but of belonging, of walking behind his grandmother, of standing beside his brother, of carrying duty like a uniform he had once hated and now could not forget. And it was in that moment, insiders say, that Harry understood the true cost of his indecision, not the palace, not the media, not public opinion, but the slow erosion of certainty inside his own home. Because while he had believed he was protecting his family by stepping away, he had never truly replaced what he left behind, only buried it beneath distance, and distance, once it collapses, brings everything back at once. Meghan, according to those close to her, lay awake as well, not sleeping, not crying, but listening, aware that the next words Harry spoke would shape everything that followed, and while the ultimatum had been delivered calmly, the emotion beneath it was raw, because she was not asking him to choose her, she was asking him to choose a direction, any direction, that allowed them to move forward. And the fear she carried that night was not of losing him to the palace, but of losing him to uncertainty, because uncertainty is what breaks families slowly, silently, without headlines, and as the hours passed, the house remained still, but the tension between them was alive, unspoken, waiting for a decision that had not yet arrived. By morning, nothing had changed outwardly, but insiders say everything had shifted internally, because Harry, now forced to confront the reality of the ultimatum, began to replay the events of the past weeks with new clarity: the meeting with William, the call Meghan had made, the palace silence, the way advisors had disappeared into quiet calculation. And he realized that the institution he thought he had escaped was still shaping his life, not through control, but through unfinished business. And the more he tried to push that realization away, the more it returned, demanding to be acknowledged. And from a reporter's perspective, this is where the story deepens, because moments like these do not resolve with declarations, they resolve with decisions that happen quietly, before anyone else is aware they are being made. Sources say Harry spent that day moving through routine as if it were unfamiliar, playing with his children, answering messages, speaking to Meghan only when necessary, yet internally separating two futures, one where he closed the door forever and protected the life they had built, and another where he confronted the past directly, knowing it could cost him peace but might finally give him closure. And that afternoon, according to insiders, he walked alone for a long time, his phone in his hand, stopping and starting as if weighing whether to make a call he knew would change everything, because once made, it could not be taken back. And while he did not make that call that day, the decision to consider it at all marked a turning point, because it meant the ultimatum had done what years of distance had not. It had forced him to face the truth. Meghan, watching him from a distance, sensed the shift, not through words, but through absence, through the way he withdrew into thought. And while she did not repeat the ultimatum, did not pressure him, did not demand answers, the boundaries she had set remained unspoken but firm, and that firmness, insiders say, was what finally made Harry understand that this was no longer about whether he missed the palace, but about whether he could fully commit to the life he had chosen without constantly looking back. And that question, once raised, refuses to be ignored because commitment requires finality, and finality had always been what he avoided. Inside palace walls, though the couple knew nothing of it yet, silence was tightening, not loosening, because advisors had begun to sense that something was shifting, that Harry's indecision was approaching resolution, and when institutions sense resolution, they prepare, not to welcome it, but to manage its impact. And from a reporter's view, this is the moment when personal drama and institutional response begin to move toward collision, because private decisions eventually demand public framing, and framing determines whether a story becomes scandal, reconciliation, or something far more complex. As night fell again, the second night since the ultimatum, Harry finally spoke, not to Meghan, not to the palace, but to himself, admitting quietly that no matter what he chose, something would be lost, and that realization brought a strange calm, because clarity, even painful clarity, is better than endless tension, and while no announcement was made, no call placed, no message sent, insiders say that the direction of his choice had begun to take shape, and that was the night Meghan understood. Something had changed, because she did not need words to feel it. She felt it in the way the house settled, in the way the silence softened, not because the conflict was resolved, but because a decision was forming. And as the world slept, unaware of the crossroads unfolding behind closed doors, one truth became increasingly clear to those watching from inside and outside the story. The ultimatum had done what nothing else could. It had forced Harry to choose between the life he left behind and the life he had built, and once that choice is made, the consequences no longer belong only to him. They belong to everyone who has been waiting for his next move.